Hello everyone. What we have here is the Nitro Mesh Electronic Drum Kit by Alesis. I have been getting to know this kit as my kids just recently purchased it for me for my birthday, and I used to drum a long time ago, and so they're getting me back into the swing of things by getting me a new kit. I like the small footprint of it. Because it can fit nicely in a room, in the corner of a room like this, which means it doesn't take up a whole lot of space. However, there's several problems that I experienced when I set this thing up. First and foremost, I'm 6'2", and the rack on this is pretty short, and really the snare drum winds up being too low between my knees. It's very awkward to play. Also, the pedals just slide around like crazy on the floor when you use them. Now, the kick drum does have some spikes that you can drill into a carpet, and of course I did originally put this on a carpet, but I still saw too much movement. So my solution to this was to build a custom drum riser, and that drum riser looks a little something like this. So there it is. So now on this riser, I've got about a good 5 inches of lift based on, you can see the rack feet are in these little sort of pedestals. So the whole thing is lifted up. So now it's at all the pads are at a comfortable height for me. And I've got some bracing in place around all of the pedals so they don't budge when I kick them. They stay in really good shape. And also it's got pads to protect my hardwood floor, and then the walls, there's pads to keep it all soft and safe. So I'm not damaging my floor or anything. But yet I still get to take advantage of this small footprint here in the corner of the room. So in this video, I'll show you how I built this drum riser and all the steps that I took. And if you have this kit and you're experiencing some of those same problems and would like to follow along and build a riser of your own, have at it. So here's how I built mine. Alright, so one little word about this before I got started. I just wanted to make sure I got all of the pads and cymbals and everything just where I wanted them and everything locked in. One note about this rack system is these side legs are shorter than these center legs, which makes sense as you can see that the pole needs to go across. So the center 2 legs need to be a little taller. But it's important that the distance from the bottom of this piece to the ground is the same as this one. If it's not, if you look at it this way, sorry about all the junk in the background, I'm in my garage, the rack will tip in or tip out. But if you have these, if you're pretty specific about the exact height going all the way across, then it'll be nice and straight and level, and then you can decide exactly where you want all of your feet and then all your pads. And basically I wanted to get everything locked in first, and then what I'm going to do is build basically wooden risers for each foot that's going to basically lift the whole rack system up. And I'm going to do that part first, and then I'll worry about locking in the kick pedals first. So as far as supply list goes, I got a standard 4x8 by 3/4 inch thick plywood, and I just went to Home Depot and just had them rip it in half. So this is a 4x4 piece of wood. So it makes the kit super compact and small. You can stick it into the corner of a room, and it won't be in your way, but it'll still be accessible, which is nice. I also purchased a 2x8 by 8 foot piece of wood, a single standard 2x4 stud, and then I did 3 2x3s. And I'll show you why I purchased that wood and how I'm going to use it in the riser here as the video goes along. Other supplies are shown here. I got some L brackets, which I'm going to use for the kick pedals. That idea comes straight from Demonic Sweaters. I think his name is Justin. So his drum riser video, he used these, and so I'm going to use the same thing. I also grabbed a couple handles that I'm going to use and bolt onto here out of the way to where whenever I need to move it, I can just pick up the whole apparatus with these handles. I've got some felt sliders, some big ones. When I'm all said and done, I'm going to put those on the bottom of the wood. So whenever you put this down, like if you put it down on a wood floor, it'll be real careful not to damage the wood floor, and it also should serve to muffle it a little bit. And then these pads I got, I'm going to use these in a couple of different ways. They are just heavy-duty felt blankets that you can cut to size. And so I got a bunch of those. I might have gotten more than I needed. I'll return whatever I don't use. And those are going to be used. You'll see how I use those a little bit later. I'm going to have little borders or bumpers. And then, so if this goes right up against the wall, the little felt will be a cushion against the wall. I got some nice patio floor paint. So it'll be super durable. And I just had it done to a matte black, so it should match the kit itself. So it should look pretty sharp once it's all painted. And because this is floor paint, it's designed to be stepped on and beat up a little bit. I've got a couple paint brushes. I got some Gorilla Glue I'm going to actually glue the felts onto the bottom of the wood. And even though these are sticky, I'm going to glue these on as well, so it's nice and tight and it can take a beating. So that's as far as supply list. That's what I have, and we'll see how the project goes next. Alright, so I've kind of fiddled and futzed with it and got it right to the point where I want, where it's pretty symmetrical into the corner, but it's about 3 inches. It's about 3 inches in, and there's a reason for that. I'll show you in a minute. But basically, I wanted to make sure that the symbols are not in the way, because whenever this is built, it's going to be designed to just be bumped into the corner of a room, literally touching the walls. And I wanted to make sure there was enough clearance for the symbols, because they kind of stick out from the rack in my setup. Maybe yours doesn't. So I'm going to have a little bumper on the bottom, and so I use this string with a weight on it. So if I sort of simulate, let me scooch this down, if I kind of simulate like this is the wall, roughly, okay, if I can get this to work, right about there, okay, let's call it there. I wanted to make sure, notice there's at least an inch or so between the symbol and where the wall is going to be. Actually, it's about like that. It's about a couple inches. So I did that on both sides. So basically, I'm confident where it is now. It's kind of as far back into the corner as it can get, but yet still have room to not, bump into the wall for the symbols or anything like that. And then I'll just move the whole thing a little bit. I went ahead and marked all where the feet are, and then I'm going to cut out some pieces of wood for the next step. Okay, the next step was I took the 2x4 and I basically cut 12 little squares. A 2x4 is actually not 2x4, it's only 3.5 inches wide. So this is basically a 3.5 by 3.5 inch square, roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I did 12 of these guys. I'll sand it up a little bit later, but you can use some gloves just to get the rough bits off for now. And once you have these 12 blocks, we can start building the risers for the individual rack feet. Alright, next thing we're going to do is just basically stack up these blocks 3 high next to each one of our circles. What we're going to do is kind of center this on the circle and then stack these 3 high, and I'll sort of alternate the grain for each one, something like that. And then we're going to screw this block into the plywood, screw this block into that block, and screw that block into that block. To do this, I'm using 2-inch screws because, so here you can see these guys are about 2 inches. And because this is 3/4 inch plywood, let me get the camera over here. If you put the screw into the 2x4, it's going to go deep into the 3/4 inch plywood, but it's not going to go puncture through and hit the ground. And so that's really important. Obviously, we don't want to be scratching the ground. Now, we will have the pads on the bottom, which will give us another kind of 1/4 inch of lift anyway, but 2.5 inches would be too long. And of course, anything shorter than 2 inches isn't going to have enough grab into the plywood. So 2-inch screws, and we're going to screw these in. Also, you have to drill pilot holes, and I picked a drill bit that's actually pretty thick. I actually don't know the thickness of this. It's not going to have a ton of grab on the threads of the screw because of the size of this hole. That's going to happen with this drill bit. But if you drill too small of a hole, or if you don't drill a hole at all, you start putting the screw through the little tiny piece of 2x4, it's just going to split it. I've had experience with this to know that you never screw a decently sized screw into a piece of 2x4 like this without a goodly kind of pilot hole. So I'm going to drill a couple pilot holes and then screw these in. All right, so here you can see I've got the pilot holes drilled. They look about like that, and then get a screw in there like that, and I'm only going to put in 2 because the next block up I'm going to rotate and do 2 this way, so obviously the screws don't hit each other when we're drilling. Alright, so both screws are in, and then I'm going to take the next piece of 2x4, and just for good measure I'm going to rotate it to where the grains are alternating pattern. And then in this case, since the screws are there, I'm going to put the screws roughly there. So you can see I got the next 2 screws in. It's nice and tight. The wood is not cracking because I'm using the big pilot hole with the drill, but yet it's still plenty firm to keep it in there. Also, I like to sink the screw just a little bit under the surface of the wood, so it's not protruding any, and you get a nice smooth fit block upon block. So here's the last one, and its screws are going to go here as well. All right, there you have it. So the 3 blocks are screwed in tight. It's super firm. And then if you pick up the plywood and you look on the bottom, it's nice and clean, nothing punctured through, and there we go. So now I want to do the same thing over the other circles that I drew on the wood to get all 4 spots for the 4 legs. One other thing I should mention is you want to come in about 1 inch from each edge. If you get any closer to the corner, you're going to split the 2x4. And then also, I really should have been putting wood glue in between each block, but I forgot about that. I'm not going to obsess about it, and I'm not going to do the wood glue, but if you're doing this project from scratch, I would suggest adding wood glue, because glue will hold these blocks a lot better than the screws will in the long run. So yeah, you might want to think about that. Alright, so we have our 4 sets of blocks all screwed in nice and tight. Now obviously, if you put the drums up on these little tiny feet, they would just fall off. That's why we got the 2x8. So I'll show you what to do with that next. Alright, so now here I have my 2x8s that I've cut into little 5-inch segments. And then so whenever you put those up like so, and just kind of wrap all the way around, like this kind of a deal. So what we're going to do is drill a couple of screws in on each side to hold these in place, and then what you have is this little pocket. It's a couple of inches deep that each foot will of the rack will sit in, and that'll obviously keep it from coming out. So the next step is I'm going to finish cutting off all my 5-inch segments for these feet, and then do a little bit of sanding to get these kind of schnibbles, or whatever you want to call the little wood flecks, off, so they're pretty smooth. Eventually we're going to get this smoothed out and painted as well. So I have these roughly sanded, and then also the grain I'm going to curve in towards the foot on all four sides. The board is relatively straight, but if anything, it tends to bow a little bit with the grain, and if anything, I want this to bow inward if it's going to bow at all. And also I need to be really cognizant of drilling and screwing into tiny small pieces of wood. I don't want them to split and crack. So for each one of these side pieces, I'm just going to put in 2 screws. I'm going to put one that's going to go roughly on this side of this piece of wood, and it's going to go into whichever block does not have the screw in it. So this screw is here, so the middle block, the screw is over there. So if I screw into this area, I'll be screwing into fresh wood, and I'm not going to risk hitting the screw that's in that middle block. So, and I'm going to repeat that philosophy all the way around, and then the second screw is going to be going this way into the top piece. I'm going to do that relatively close to the top, and I'll put in one, here, one here, and there. Oops, there. So I'm going to go ahead and put those screws in, and then show you what that looks like. So there you have it. Each one of the 4 pieces has 2 screws in each one. One of the screws towards the top is going into its neighbor, and then the screw sort of at the bottom, I either screwed into the middle one or the bottom block, screwing into the 2x4s in the center, and I spread them out like that so we could get, roughly one towards the top, one towards the bottom, one towards the left, one towards the right. But then we're also being aware of where the screws are in the 2x4s so we don't drive a screw into another screw. So overall, the whole thing is very solid, plenty solid. I really do wish I would have put wood glue on that, but so if you do this, I highly recommend wood glue, just all the different joints, a little dab of wood glue. I know better, but I forgot this time, but I'm just going to keep pressing on to get this project done. But so now I just need to rinse and repeat for my other 3 feet over here. And that's next. So following the old adage of if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing right, I went to Home Depot and got some Gorilla Glue, wood glue. And I unscrewed everything, and I'm going to wood glue it all. So just a simple dab will do you between each piece of wood. Anytime wood touches wood, I'm going to add some wood glue. I like to put it on there and then just sort of go around in circles a little bit. Gives you a nice big good coating, and then I'll put the screws right back, all back in the same holes. Put the assemble the whole thing back together again. I'll do the same with my other blocks, and then I have my wood blocks ready to reassemble the border around all of the feet. So everything is going to be put together with not only screws but also with wood glue. And there you have it. So we got our 4-leg pedestals, I don't know what you want to call them, all done. I mean, they're not perfect. There's, some cracks and gaps, and I mean, I am no carpenter here, but it is going to be super solid, especially with that wood glue. I would just say absolutely necessary on the wood glue, because that will just harden right up, and those things will just be rock solid, which is what we want. We don't want this thing falling apart. This was brutal on the knees. I highly recommend some knee pads if you have them. But that's what it looks like so far. And here's what she looks like with the Alesis mounted on the riser. So just like that, we get an additional 5 inches of height, which really gets that snare up over my knees when I'm on the drum throne. And I also can even go ahead and have the throne 1 notch up, so I'm not eating my knees when I'm playing. I can have a nice comfortable height to sit, and yet now all my pads and cymbals are up high enough for me to comfortably play. And this kind of guarantees me that I'm I can tuck this sucker away from the away into the corner of a room, and it'll kind of maximize the space in the room. And yet you can see here, like, I'm gonna have a little bumper there. We'll get to that in a minute. And then the wall, the cymbal is not going to hit the wall. And then if I play out with this, like I might take it to my church, I'll just have a single, this is not super heavy. I got handles that I'm going to put on it, and I can just take this whole setup just the way it is to church, and there you go. So that's the idea. All right, so the next thing I'm going to work on is basically stabilizing my pedals. Now there's, I mentioned earlier, there's a guy named Justin who's also known as Demonic Sweaters on YouTube. I don't know him, we've never spoken, but I have watched a lot of his videos, and he did something very similar to this on his riser that he made for the Alesis Nitro mesh kit. So search for that and watch that. You can see what he did. He had a different objective. He had to kind of do some sound silencing stuff. But one of the things he did is put in these L brackets on his kick drum. I'm going to do it on my my hi-hat as well. And then he had like these little foam things. But basically what I'm doing is taking the heavy-duty felt blankets, and you can cut this with scissors. And so I've cut it into two little strips like this, and then I'm peeling off the adhesive, and just for good measure I'm using some Gorilla Glue to stick the pads onto the L brackets here. And then when you put the hi-hat pedal right up against those pads, it will stop the hi-hat pedal from moving. I'm going to do two large ones at the end here. I'm also sort of wedged in. I kind of made a mistake. You can see the holes here. I didn't leave room for the cable. This is kind of where the pedal feels comfortable for me. On your setup it might be different, and I am going to have a little border here, which we'll do in a minute. So the pedal is going to wedge kind of in this area nicely. My fits on here nice and comfortably, and then I'll be using these smaller brackets and putting them right under here. The pedal doesn't clamp all the way shut, so there's plenty of room to use the pedal and have this L bracket not interfere with it. But the idea is basically to have the L brackets with the pads, and then have the small L brackets on the sides to keep it in place and from kind of moving side to side, and then the bigger L brackets in the back to keep the whole thing from sort of being nudged forward as I'm stomping on this thing while I'm playing. So that's the idea here. I'm working on that part now. So this is what the final thing looks like for the hi-hat pedal. So I've got the two smaller L brackets over here with the pads on them, and the two bigger ones in the back with the pads. I'm going to let that glue dry. I'll fill in this with a little bit of wood filler, and then when we get this painted, you won't even notice that mistake. But those little brackets should keep the hi-hat pedal nice and firmly secure so it doesn't wiggle around. Same thing over here for the kick drum pedal. Rinse and repeat over there. And here's what the kick drum looks like. So I got the two L brackets right there that stop the forward motion. That's the main thing with the kick drum, of course. And I put two little ones on the sides here and here to keep it from wobbling left and right, and those should be the forces that I need to counteract. I put it against this little black piece of the actual kick drum as opposed to the pedal. My thinking there is I might get a different pedal, maybe a double bass drum pedal or something like that in the future, and of course I can just pull up the L brackets and move them, not a big deal. But I thought this way I can just unclamp this pedal, put a new one on, and my L brackets can probably stay exactly where they are, hopefully. But anyway, this should accomplish the goal of stabilizing my kick drum pedal. Obviously, before I put those L brackets in, I sort of, sat down and positioned them exactly in a place that was very comfortable for me, and so that should let's accomplish the goal. Also, one nice side effect of the positioning here of the L brackets is, let me see if I can get the camera on my phone here in the right place. The way it's positioned, there's nothing on this side, right? Because the kick drum is never going to come toward me as I'm banging on it. It's always going to go away and side to side. So I've stabled away and side to side. So the nice thing is, when I want to move this, all I have to do is pull, and then we're instantly clear of all of the L brackets. So when I want to set it up, I'll just pop it over there and just slide it into place. So that's kind of a nice side effect of this particular setup of the L brackets. Alright, we're getting close to the end of construction in here, and then we'll be doing some painting, and then finally putting some pads on to protect the floor and stuff. But I decided to put a little sort of a border, like a rim, all the way around this 4x4. And the reason for that is two things. First of all, I was a little, without it, I was a little concerned that, maybe here I am drumming and whoop, I'm getting a little crazy and it falls off. And then, not like I'd get hurt, but it'd just be real awkward. And, I wanted to have, basically, I'd rather bump up against, sort of a little wall here instead of, falling off the back of the thing. And the other thing is, this is going to live kind of in, in a room in my house where it's going to be literally pushed up against a corner, as I've mentioned before. And so what I'm going to do with this border on the two sides that are going to be along the corner, this side and that side, I'm going to use some of the felt blankets here and kind of cut these along here to size and have a few of these just along those two edges, to where when I put this thing in a room, I can slide it, boom, all the way up to where it's touching the wall. And the felt blankets are going to keep it from scratching the wall. It's going to keep it from banging against the wall when I'm playing the drums. Should be nice and quiet. And yeah, so that's it. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut these, four. I had bought 3 originally, but I went to the hardware store and bought one more because they need to be a little bit larger than 4 feet. I can't just get 2 of them and cut them in half, because then the corners would be sort of empty. And so I didn't want to do that. So anyway, I got enough to put that border all the way around, and that's what I'm going to do next. So first step is to cut the wood to size. Okay, so the border 2x3s are cut just fine. You could probably be fancy and do like a 45-degree cut, but I'm not fancy, so I'm not going to do that. But anyway, so it's the border all the way around. So that's what it's going to look like. In order to get this thing on there, I'm going to run a bead of wood glue all along this edge, or all along the 2x3 edge, one of the two, and then put that in place. And then I'm going to put a few screws into this way, probably about 4, maybe one every foot or so. The 2-inch screws are still perfect. When I drill my pilot hole, I'm going to try to drill through the 2x3, but not drill into the plywood, because I want to get some really good grip on the threads into the plywood, and it's less likely to split because these the board's bigger and everything. I might go with a smaller drill to maybe do a smaller pilot hole. I'm not quite sure. I'm going to play with it and see, and I'll let you know what I do. But basically, glue and screws all the way around. Okay, the border rail is on. It's all glued in place and screwed in place. I basically put a screw in a few inches from each end. Then I put one in the middle. And then on a couple of the pieces of wood, it was bowing just a little. So I put one in the middle of those. So there's basically 5 screws per side with glue. And then on a couple times it slipped on the in the wood. It didn't get a good grip. So I used this 2.5-inch screw for a few of them, and then just the regular drill to do that sinkhole or pre-hole or whatever you want to call it to make sure that the wood didn't split. And that's it. So it's all put together. I'm going to take the drums off and take her outside and start painting. I'm just going to paint the whole thing black. And so here we have it so far. Got the first coat of black paint on. I'm going to put at least one more coat on, but probably 2 more coats of paint, because that paint that I'm using is for outdoor floors and stuff like that. So I want this I want the paint to really seal it and protect it and keep it from getting scuffs and scrapes and scratches. But the look it should be invisible, and of course obviously the black matches the Alesis drum set, and so it should look pretty slick. I've got my L brackets in place for the hi-hat and for the kick, and then my risers for all 4 of the rack, and then the little boundary on the outside. I thought of one more enhancement I'm going to do is along this edge is it's going to face into the room, so I'll have the pads on these 2 edges so it can really bump up against the wall and not hurt the wall. But along this edge I'm going to put casters, so because it is kind of heavy, I'll put handles back in here, probably like right here and right here, and then so it can be picked up by those handles, because I don't want to pick it up by this because it could rip that off. And then on this edge will be 3 or 4 casters, probably 4, and then that way you could literally just balance it with your hands and push it, and it could just roll. Still be heavy and unwieldy, but I don't plan on moving it very often. So there you go. Gotta put one more coat of paint on it and see what it looks like then. Alright, got 3 coats of paint on there. Everything's dried up nicely. It looks good. And so now we're going to flip it over and put the pads on the bottom. That's next. Alright, I have the riser flipped over, and I had these felt sliders that there's basically using for moving furniture or putting under the feet of a couch or something. I bought those at Home Depot, and then what I'm going to do is just these particular ones don't have a sticky side at all, so I'm just going to put a dab of Gorilla Glue, something like that, and then pop that there, and I'm going to just do the glue on all of the little sliders so they stay in place. There's no real rhyme or reason to how many I put out. That's just how many was in this package, or the pattern. I just did something sort of semi-random. But at any rate, this should give me a nice, smooth, soft surface to not scratch up any hardwood floors that I put this on. So I'm going to glue all these down now. Okay, got them all glued down. The last thing I did is, after I glued them, I just sort of turned them a little and sort of kind of moved them around in a tiny little circle just to smush the glue around nice and smooth on the bottom. So I'm just gonna let these dry. I might put it like a little book or something on top of each one of them just to weight it down a little, and then wait a good hour or so, make sure the glue's nice and dry before we move it again. So I just wound up putting some scraps of wood just sort of spread out on top of those little things. The whole goal here is just to make sure, it's kind of a little windy outside today. Don't want it to blow them away before the glue has a chance to dry, and just to put a little bit of pressure on them. That's about it. Alright, the pads on the bottom are dry, and so now all I'm going to do is take these pieces of once again the felt blankets that I was cutting up to use on the L brackets. I took new sheets and cut them in half, and then I'm going to adhere these onto the sides here, so when I push this up against the wall, the felt is going to be a smooth bumper against the wall, and it's not going to damage the wood floor, and it's not going to damage the wall itself. So these are nicer than the pads that I put on the bottom because these have an adhesive back, so the adhesive can keep it, it's hard to do this one-handed, you can take the adhesive off. The adhesive will have it stick in place, So I am going to Gorilla Glue it just to make sure it stays on there really well. But what I can do is just put a little dab of glue kind of in the middle like that. And then when I stick this on the edge like this, the adhesive is going to stick it in place really well. And then I don't have to worry about clamping it. And you know, the Gorilla Glue underneath is going to dry just fine, but I can just pop these on all the way on the edge. It'll be nice and quick and easy, and then I'll have the pads I want for the bumper against the wall. There we go. So the bumpers are on the edge, so when I push this into the corner of the room, it'll be nice and soft against the wall. It won't cause any noise or scratches or anything. I also put two handles on right there and there, so you can use the handles to pick it up. It's really a two-person job. It's pretty heavy, but with the handle it works really nice. And later, after this video, I'm going to put some casters along this edge, so two people could pick it up by the handle, hold it steady. All the weight is on the casters, and you could just roll it into somewhere. So that's it. Now I'm just going to put it in my room and get the drums set up on it. So this is what it looks like when it's put in place. So all along the wall, those pads are protecting it from hurting the wall. And of course I'm putting it in a room with a hardwood floor, and if you can see under there, the pads are protecting it, protecting the hardwood floor. So it looks good. So now we're going to set the drums up and see how it works. And there she is, finished product. So kit's in place. I played around on it a little bit. It feels good. I really like the way the pedals are just rock solid. They don't budge. They don't move when I kick them. You know, and all the pads are at the right height now. And the whole thing is in a 4 foot by 4 foot square tucked away in the corner of the room. And we've got pads to take care of to protect the floor and to protect the walls. And it's just going to be really convenient. It's kind of next to my office here. So, you know, I can just jump over here, play a few songs, and then get back to work. So it should be pretty fun. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know if you make a drum riser of your own. It'd be fun. Thanks. Bye.